5 most famous unsolved crimes ever. We will never know. Just the thought of a person murdering in cold blood and getting away with it can send chills to the very innards of your soul. The victims, unavenged, and the killer still at large, ready to terrorize at a moment's notice, is simply frightening. The murder mysteries on this list are some of the most brutal killings in history and have yet to be solved. What are the most famous unsolved murder cases? This list has them all. In some of these cases, people were charged with murder only to be acquitted from a lack of evidence. In others, police didn't have any suspects or couldn't identify the victim. This list is only 5 cases of a lot of famous murders unsolved from around the world, as well as information about every single victim and any suspects who are named. Amber Hagerman. Most people have experienced the feeling of hearing an alarm sound, and look down at their mobile device to see an Amber Alert. But most don't know the harrowing story behind what is now an all-too-familiar call for help. Detective Ben Lopez of the Arlington, Texas Police Department still remembers the afternoon of January 13, 1996. He was a patrol officer at the time. Amber Hagerman, just 9 years old, was snatched off her bicycle in the parking lot of a local grocery store. The only description was a blue truck that was seen leaving the scene. Lopez was quickly pulled onto a special task force to find Amber. For those first few days, we spent all of our extra time looking, Detective Lopez told Dateline NBC. It was like if you weren't on another call, you were actively looking for her. We were looking everywhere in the city. Despite national attention and widespread media coverage, a dog walker came across the little girl's body 5 days later floating in a creek just miles from the grocery. Her throat had been slit. Last Wednesday marked 20 years since Amber was kidnapped and murdered, but whoever stole Amber away has not been identified. Law enforcement and family members gathered in Texas the day before the anniversary for a tearful press conference to once again ask for some type of answers. Decades of dissonance. Thousands of tips have poured in over the years, most in the weeks and months after Amber vanished. A handful are still phoned in every month. Despite all this, officials say they are no closer to solving Amber's case. It's been extremely frustrating for it to go on this long and not have it solved, said Detective Lopez. We have other cold cases and they're all frustrating. We want to solve them all, but 20 years is a long time. It's frustrating not to be able to give the mom and the family an answer. Amber's younger brother, Ricky Hagerman, who was riding his bike alongside Amber that day, joined in the plea for answers at the press conference. I didn't quite understand what was going on, Ricky Hagerman, now 25, said at the Tuesday press conference. We want closure and we want justice, so if you have any information, please come forward. Even today, Detective Lopez still pursues each lead as if it were the first. We continue working the case. We still investigate every one of those leads like it might be the right one. Out of the darkness, families across the country mourned for the Hagerman family, including Diane Simone, a massage therapist and mother from Dallas. She called a local radio station the day Amber's body was found, asking if local broadcasters could team up with law enforcement to somehow get information out immediately following a child abduction. It was a call that would change hundreds of lives in the years to come. Later that year, Dallas-Fort Worth broadcasters established a coordinated system with local law enforcement whereby they could warn the public when a child was kidnapped and in danger. Over the years, the system has gone nationwide. The alert bears little Amber's name, but stands for America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response. As of December 2015, the system has helped bring 794 children home safely. If it wasn't for Amber, we would not have the Amber Alert today, Donna Williams, Amber's mother, said at the press conference this week. In December 2015, Facebook announced a partnership with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children so that Amber Alerts would show up on users' news feeds and notifications would be sent to those in the surrounding areas. Though the pain of losing Amber was raw on the Hagermans' faces this week, the alert ensures her name will never be forgotten. "It doesn't bring Amber back for Donna," said Detective Lopez. "But at least there is something that she can look at and recognize that her daughter has at least helped so many other kids." Bob Crane. His life of debauchery leads to many suspects. Bob Crane was a beloved television actor whose real life had a seedy side and whose death baffled his friends, fans and the police. He played the title role of Colonel Hogan in the 60s sitcom Hogan's Heroes. He was one of the stars of the show from 1965 until 1971, when the series was cancelled. During that time, he left his wife of more than 20 years for his co-star Sigrid Valdis. He also catered to a taste for promiscuous sex and filming it, and he is considered to have been a serious sex addict. After the show, he never found the same success he had with Hogan's Heroes. He instead took up small roles, took to the stage and continued making home pornography. He was on tour with a play when he was murdered in Scottsdale, Arizona. But, till this day, the Bob Crane's murder has never been solved. Bob Crane's sex life. Before becoming a television star, Bob Crane was a popular radio DJ in LA. He worked with ultra-famous people like Marilyn Monroe before he himself became famous. Because of this, he was a woman magnet. He was never without a woman willing to sleep with him or have group sex with him and his friends. Whether they were all willing to be videotaped is not clear. Many of them later said that they had no idea he was filming or taking photographs. It was this ability to pick up women and his love of documenting it that led to his friendship with John Henry Carpenter. John Henry Carpenter was an electronics whiz with the same sexual appetite as Bob. Together, they would pick up women and take them back to hotels, their homes and other people's homes, where they would engage in sexual acts and document it. There is no evidence that they were homosexual, but there were rumors that John wanted more from Bob than he was willing to give. Rumor has it that Bob told John he did not want to continue the friendship a few days, or the day, before his murder. Carpenter denied it. A bloody murder. On June 28, 1978, Bob Crane was killed in the early hours of the morning. Someone came into his room at the Winefield Place Apartments in Scottsdale, Arizona and beat him to death while he slept. He was hit in the head with a blunt object, at least once, most likely twice. He never even had a chance to leave the bed. The killer also wrapped an electrical cord around his neck and tied it there. Some believe this was a message regarding Bob's love of videotaping sex. Another interesting find was a bottle of scotch in the room. According to those who knew him, Bob did not drink scotch. There was no sign of a struggle and no sign of forced entry. His killer, his friend. Given the clues at the scene, police believed that Bob knew his killer. It is possible that he'd let the killer in or that he left the door open for the killer. He may have even fallen asleep with the killer in the room. At the time, Bob Crane was divorcing his wife Sigrid. He also may have had countless enemies in the form of jilted lovers, jealous husbands, boyfriends and angry women who did not know they were videotaped by the star. The list of suspects could have been very long. However, there was no evidence that one of his lovers had anything to do with it. His wife also had an alibi. Sure, she could have hired someone, but someone he knew? Wingman deceit? This left police with John Henry Carpenter. He and Bob Crane were inextricably linked in this sordid tale. John got a stream of lovers through his friendship with Crane. He had a lifestyle to lose if Crane was to sever their friendship. The problem with that is there is no evidence they had a falling out, or very little evidence. Police found it suspicious that John called the apartment while they were there, several times, and never asked why the police were in his friend's apartment. That could be explained by John not wanting to implicate himself. It had something to do with their pornography. Much more difficult to explain is blood found in John's rental car that matched Bob's blood type. The problem with that is there was no way to test the DNA at the time. Over the years, John Carpenter was the main suspect in the case, but there was never enough to arrest him. Prosecutors decided to go with a picture of what could have been brain matter in Carpenter's rental car in 1994. The picture did not hold up in court and he was acquitted. To this day, he is the go-to in this whodunit. There is no single other person who draws as much suspicion in this case, but it could be that the possible list is simply too long and varied to pick one out of the myriad of people with motive. The question remains: who killed Bob Crane? The Black Dahlia. After her gory murder in 1947, Elizabeth Short, better known as Black Dahlia, became one of the most famous unsolved cases in the country. Short's body was found on January 15, 1947, but nearly 70 years later, the cold case is still not solved. Here's what we still don't know about it: why, exactly, she is called Black Dahlia. Some speculate that her dark moniker was derived from the name of a 1946 film noir release written by renowned crime fiction author Raymond Chandler. Others say she was given the name because of the jet black flowers she wore in her hair. The most common version of the story of her naming, as reported by the Los Angeles Times, is that customers at a drugstore in Long Beach dubbed her Black Dahlia as a joke, referencing the movie. At the time, it was common practice for newspapers to give spicy names to female murder victims or their killers. In fact, before Black Dahlia caught on, one paper dubbed her Killing the Werewolf Murder. Then, a reporter, either Bevel Means, Aggie Underwood or Jack Smith, found out about Short's floral nickname, and from there on out, the papers ran with it. What she was doing the entire week before her murder. The last time Short was seen alive was on January 9, 1947. That day, she was in the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles, and then she vanished, only to turn up dead 6 days later. The tabloids decided to glam up her story by making her out to be a possible prostitute, last seen in smutty, tight-fitting clothes. She did, according to CBS, date around in the busy post-war boomtown that was 1947 Hollywood. But that active social life made it difficult to pin down her exact movements and whereabouts. Where she was killed. Short was found by a woman walking her child on the morning of January 15, naked, cut in half and severely mutilated in a vacant lot near Leimert Park. The body was just a few feet from the sidewalk and posed in the grass in such a way that the woman reportedly thought it was a mannequin at first, according to the FBI. Short couldn't be mistaken for a mannequin for long, though. Her face was slit, ear to ear, and she had cuts on her body. However, there was no blood at the scene, which led police to believe she'd been killed elsewhere and moved. It was pretty gruesome. Brian Carr, one of the LAPD detectives who worked on the case, later said, according to Bio, "I just can't imagine someone doing that to another human being. Who killed her?" Over the years, dozens of people have confessed to Short's murder. One of the original investigators, a homicide detective named Harry Hansen, told the Los Angeles County Grand Jury in 1949 that he thought a medical man committed the crime, based on the precision with which the body was cut in half. "I've seen many horrible mutilation cases, many of them, and if any of you ladies and gentlemen had ever seen a case like that, and would see the pictures of this Elizabeth Short case, you could detect the difference immediately," he said, according to the Los Angeles Times. Early on, an Army corporal was one of the primary suspects, according to Time. He said he'd been out drinking with Short a few days before the discovery of her body, but, after imbibing too much, he blacked out and came to in a cab in New York City. His confession was discredited when it came out that he'd been on his military base the day she died. In 1991, a woman claimed she'd unlocked repressed memories pointing to her father as the culprit, but police never found concrete evidence tying good old dad to the crime. One of the most hyped accusations in recent years came from Steve Hodel, who said his late father, a doctor named George Hodel, was the killer. In early investigations, the doc had been considered among the 22 most likely suspects, a group that also included Short's landlord and a jealous boyfriend, according to CBS. Although others have expressed skepticism about Steve Hodel's claims, including the assertion that Dad's handwriting matched a suspected sample of the killer's writing, he's still sure his dad did it. "He wanted to be like Man Ray," he said. He wanted to be an artist, and I think this was his masterpiece. Betsy Aardsma. The slight breeze combined with the cold November air was enough to send a chill down the spine of anyone who strolled across Penn State University's campus. The day was November 28, 1969, the day after Thanksgiving, and for 22-year-old Betsy Aardsma, the large campus seemed empty. Many students had gone home for the holiday, but there were a few like Betsy who had a major paper due and needed to work on it. Betsy and her roommate, Sharon Brand, left the room at Atherton Hall and walked toward the Patty Library. The two agreed to meet up again later and catch a movie. As they approached the library, Betsy and Sharon parted ways. July 11, 1947 was a warm, muggy day, but that did not matter to Richard and Esther Aardsma, who welcomed a baby girl into the world. A baby girl who would later be described as artistic and bright. Richard and Esther named their daughter Elizabeth Ruth Betsy Aardsma. Betsy grew up in a household with 3 other siblings. Betsy's father, Richard, worked as a sales tax auditor for the state of Michigan, and Esther was a stay-at-home mom. Betsy had a normal life growing up. Her parents were religious, like many other people in the town of Holland, Michigan. Betsy was the second oldest child in her family and was active in school activities, which she continued through her whole school career. Her time at Holland High School was a breeze, and she ended up graduating 5th in her class. As the end of her studies neared at Holland High, Betsy was conflicted on what she should do after high school. English, art and biology were her strong subjects, and she often felt like she wanted to become a doctor. With her 5'8" frame, Betsy had long brown hair that had just a hint of a red to it. There was never a shortage of boys following her, but for the most part she was not interested. She knew college was a must, and she was a serious student when it came time for her studies, and having a boyfriend at this time would be a distraction. With a smile and small talk, Betsy would pass on dates the boys begged her for, and her attention was now on her future at Hope College in the fall of 1965. The idea of becoming a doctor was not only what Betsy wanted, but her parents were also pushing for it. Betsy originally wanted to enroll at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, but Hope College was where her parents graduated from, and the college was known for the strong pre-med courses. While at Hope College, Betsy came out of her shell and ended up going on several dates. However, no one special ever crossed her path, and she was never in a serious relationship while she attended Hope. For the most part, the young men Betsy went out with were nice, but there was one man who became angry with Betsy. After some form of disagreement, the man either pulled a knife on her or threatened to, but either way, Betsy ended the relationship. No charges were filed by Betsy, and the matter seems to have been dropped. "I run into asses every day," Betsy told her friend who was attending Marquette University in Wisconsin. Time passed by too slowly for Betsy at Hope College, and she often complained this place is not as alive as it should be. Hope College, as it was turning out, was not living up to Betsy's expectations. She had other ambitions and interests that could not be fulfilled if she were to stay at Hope. Betsy was interested in the Peace Corps. She had a drive to help others who were in need. One way she would be able to pursue the Peace Corps was to transfer to the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, where the Corps held a heavy presence. So she transferred. By the fall of 1967, the United States was in a full-blown war with Vietnam, and the University of Michigan was a battleground for student protests. The university had been a hotbed for anti-war politics and was the birthplace for the left-wing organization, Students for a Democratic Society, an organization led by Bill Ayers. When Betsy arrived in Ann Arbor that fall, she decided to change majors. She enjoyed reading literature and poetry, so a change to the English department happened. Her drive to go into the medical field had dwindled. It was no longer what she wanted in life. Betsy also had another interest that continued to grow. His name was David Wright, a pre-med major she enjoyed being around. By the time of her senior year in college, 1968-69 came about, Wright decided to transfer to Penn State Hershey Medical School. Although Betsy still wanted to join the Peace Corps, which would have required her to travel around the world. Wright made it known he would not wait for her to return. A tough decision Betsy had to make, but she chose to be with Wright over the Corps. So in the fall of 1969, Betsy continued on with her studies as a graduate student at Penn State's main campus at University Park in the small town of State College. While it was a tough decision Betsy made, she could no longer pretend she was not afraid of the recent killings that had taken place in Ann Arbor. John Norman Collins, also known as the co-ed killer, was a 22-year-old Eastern Michigan University student studying elementary education. Collins began his killing spree in 1967 and resumed killing college women in March 1969. Getting out of Ann Arbor was a must for Betsy, although she would miss her friends, but her family felt better now she was a safe distance from the killings. "Thank God, she's at a place where she is safe," said Betsy's former brother-in-law. Once the fall semester began at Penn State, Betsy spent a lot of time studying. She did not go to many parties and did not have much of a social life. However, with the exception of going to Hershey on the weekends to see David, Betsy was just as serious about graduate school as she was about her undergraduate studies. The English department at Penn State was rather tough, and in order to make it through, Betsy had to study hard. Whenever she had free time, which was not often, she wrote to David and her family. Sometimes she felt alone, and communication in letter writing was her way to stay connected to the outside world. The last letter she wrote to David arrived a few days after her death. English 501 was a difficult class, and the professor, Harrison Messeroli, was known around campus as a demanding teacher. Betsy, who was enrolled in his course, had a major paper due within a few weeks, so spending a lot of time in the library doing research was a must. Feeling the pressures of graduate school and everyday life, Betsy fell behind with her studies. She needed a break, so when Thanksgiving, 1969 arrived, she was happy to get away from campus. Betsy took a bus to Hershey to spend the holiday with David and his roommates. There, she was able to give her mind a break from school, even if only for a short time. Betsy, along with David and a half dozen or so of David's classmates, sat down on Thanksgiving evening for dinner. After they ate, Betsy decided to return to State College due to the amount of research she had to do. David did not object. He had finals of his own to study for, so he drove Betsy to the bus depot. It was the last time he saw Betsy alive. Upon arriving back to State College, Betsy returned to her dorm, which she shared with Sharon Brandt. There the two spent the rest of the evening talking and playing cards before going to bed. Murder in Patty Library. On the chilly morning of Friday, November 28, 1969, Betsy woke and did what she could on her paper before going to the library. As the day progressed, she decided it was time to get ready to leave. Betsy dressed herself in a sleeveless red dress over a white turtleneck sweater and left her dorm with her roommate, Sharon. Before Betsy could begin her research in the library, she had to meet with her two English 501 professors. By 4 p.m. Betsy had met with Professor Nicholas Joukowsky and promised she would retrieve a book she used for reference on a project that he was interested in. However, first she had to meet with her other professor, Harrison Messeroli. As she entered the library, Betsy encountered two friends, Linda Marcet and Rob Steinberg. The three spoke for a few minutes, then went on their way. Betsy made her way to Messeroli's office, located on level 1 of the Patty Library. Messeroli was busy with a bunch of meetings with students that day. She arrived on time and left after it was over. From there she moved to level 3, where she left her jacket, a book and her purse. Betsy wandered over to the card catalog, where she needed to find the call numbers for the books she needed. Another student, Marilee Ridley, bumped into Betsy as she was searching the card catalog. Finding the book number she needed, Betsy walked to level 2 Corp, where the book was located. According to author Derek Sherwood, he writes in his book Who Killed Betsy? That to understand the design and layout of the Patty core stacks, it is important to understand that the stacks were never intended to be accessed by students. This means when a student had the reference call number of the book they needed, they gave the number to the library employee and he or she would go retrieve the book. Moving around amongst the stacks was cramped and not meant to have more than one person in a book aisle. However, in 1969 the stacks were open for all students to move around freely and collect their own materials. Dean Brungard, the assistant stack supervisor, made his final rounds through the core before his shift ended at 5 p.m. It was just after 4:30 p.m. when Brungard claims to have seen a girl in a red dress alone in an island, two men talking quietly nearby. Also sitting in the stacks was a student named Joao Finda, who was at the university studying geography. At this time, Finda was working on his own research paper, and sitting a short distance from him was Merrily Ridley, who had bumped into Betsy a few minutes prior. Ridley sat at a desk doing homework just outside the entrance to the core stacks, just feet away from where Betsy was standing. Richard Allen, an aerospace historian, was also in the stacks that day using the copy machine while he waited for his son. Allen told police he heard a conversation between a man and a woman while he made his copies. Nothing stood out about the conversation and there was no hostility between the two. A crash was heard not far away from where Allen stood. Curious, he walked toward where the sound came from. It was then a man came running past him. Allen said the man looked like a student, and he had to move or he would have been run into. The crash sound also caught the attention of Finda and Ridley, who saw a man rushing toward them. Somewhat alarmed by the actions of the man, Ridley stood up as the man came closer. "That girl needs help," the man said to Ridley and pointed in the direction where the sound came from. Ridley wanted to see what the problem was, so the man led her to where the girl was and he quickly left. There in aisle 50 and 51 lay the body of Betsy Aardsma. Ridley checked for signs of life, but found none. She spotted a little blood on the white turtleneck Betsy had on. Ridley, who was alarmed at this time, yelled for help. Books were scattered all over the floor and a metal bookshelf had been knocked loose as well. The sound of the falling books was the only sound heard by the people in the library. No screams or sounds of a struggle were reported. While waiting for help to arrive, Ridley remained with the unconscious Betsy. Finda, however, saw the man who approached Ridley leave the core and became suspicious. He followed the man up the stairs. He continued to follow the fleeing man out of the library, but the daylight had faded into night by this time and Finda lost the man. A student library employee witnessed a man rushing out of the library with the black man following. The library employee was able to give a description of the man to police and a sketch was made. The screams of Ridley were heard and another library employee raced to a phone to call for help. The time was 5:01 p.m. when a pair of student paramedics were dispatched from the Rittenauer Health Center. The two arriving medics were told they were responding to a girl who had fainted in the library. Upon arriving at the scene, the two medics parted through the small crowd that had gathered and felt for a pulse. One thought he felt one and the two medics lifted Betsy on a gurney and exited through the core on a service elevator. At the health center, chest compressions were still being administered on Betsy. Only then did the attending doctor notice more blood appearing with each chest compression. The chest compressions were ordered stopped, as it was obvious something far worse than fainting was wrong with Betsy. At 5:19 p.m. the attending doctor declared 22-year-old Betsy Aardsma dead. Not knowing anything beyond someone fainted in the library and caused a mess, library staff began cleaning the scene. The books were picked up and placed back on the shelf and a mop was used to clean the floor. Any physical evidence left at the scene was now gone. Still not knowing the exact cause of death, the doctor at the health center, along with a member of the state police present, cut away Betsy's bloody sweater and bra. It was then the cause of death had been discovered, a single stab wound to the chest. Betsy's death was now ruled a homicide. The police ordered campus security to assist in gathering statements from anyone present at the library. Betsy's body was transported to a nearby hospital for an autopsy within hours of her death. By 11 p.m. Dr. Thomas Magnani arrived at the hospital to determine the exact cause of death. The conclusions reached by Dr. Magnani shed some light on what happened in the stacks at Patty Library. As mentioned before, the aisle between bookshelves was too narrow for anyone to pass by another person without turning sideways. At the time of the murder, the bookshelves extended to the wall, so anyone would be unable to escape if need be. So this means Betsy's killer could only have approached from one direction. The killer must have appeared to Betsy as either another student doing research or possibly someone she knew. Whoever it was obviously approached in a non-threatening manner since no screams for help were heard. There was nothing that suggested a struggle of any kind, Dr. Magnani said. It was also the opinion of Magnani that the killer knew exactly where to plunge the knife into Betsy in order to keep her quiet. By stabbing her in the chest like the killer did, it caused Betsy's lungs to fill with blood, leaving her unable to call out. The stab wound Aardsma received would have required her killer to have considerable strength to penetrate that deep into her chest. Her pulmonary artery was severed and her heart was hit. Dr. Magnani believes Betsy was attacked while facing her killer, which could explain the conversation Richard Allen overheard. With no signs of a struggle and no defensive wounds were found on Betsy, the evidence points to the fact the killer was someone she knew or didn't appear to pose a threat. As time passed, the police still were no closer to finding the killer of Betsy Aardsma. They developed a few theories that were never proven and spoke with a few possible suspects, which led to dead ends. The murder of Betsy Aardsma is still technically an open investigation, and as such, police case files are not open for public viewing. So it is unknown exactly who or what the police actually know about the killer. What is known is that he approached Betsy in an aisle where she was unable to escape, and he had enough strength to plunge a knife into her chest in a location that would prevent her from calling out. Chances are the killer was the same person who approached Ridley and said help was needed. After showing Ridley where help was needed, he left the scene by way of a staircase, which a finder followed. Later, police found a little splatter of blood on the stairway wall. To police, it looked as if the killer had flicked the blood off his fingers after wiping off the knife. Betsy's funeral was held on December 3, 1969 at Trinity Reformed Church in Holland, Michigan. David Wright, who was devastated by Betsy's murder, thought about not attending her funeral. He did attend, however, and he placed one rose in Betsy's hand as she lay in her coffin. Andrew and Abby Borden. Andrew Jackson Borden was one of the leading citizens of Fall River, Massachusetts, a prosperous mill town and seaport. The Borden family had strong roots to the community and had been among the most influential citizens of the region for decades. At the age of 70, Borden was certainly one of the richest men in the city. He was a director on the board of several banks and a commercial landlord with considerable holdings. He was a tall, thin and dear man, and while he was known for this thrift and admired for his business abilities, he was not well known for his humor, nor was he particularly likable. Borden lived with his second wife, Abby Durfee Gray, and his daughters from his first marriage, Emma and Lizzie, in a 2.5-story frame house. It was located in an unfashionable part of town, but was close to his business interests. Both daughters felt the house was beneath their station in life and begged their father to move to a nicer place. Borden's frugal nature never even allowed him to consider this. In spite of this, and his conservative daily life, Borden was said to be moderately generous with both of his daughters. The events that would lead to tragedy began on Thursday, August 4, 1892. The Borden household was up early that morning as usual. Emma was not at home, having gone to visit friends in the nearby town of Fairhaven, but the girls' Uncle Job had arrived the day before for an unannounced visit. John Vinicum Morse, the brother of Andrew Borden's first wife, was a regular guest in the Borden home. He traveled from Dartmouth, Massachusetts several times each year to visit the family and conduct business in town. The first person awake in the house that morning was Bridget Sullivan, the maid. Bridget was a respectable Irish girl who Emma and Lizzie both rudely insisted on calling Maggie, which was the name of a previous servant. At the time of the murders, Bridget was 26 years old and had been in the Borden household since 1889. There was nothing to say that she was anything but an exemplary young woman, who had come to America from Ireland in 1886. She did not stay in the house during the night following the murders, but did come back on Friday night to her third-floor room. On Saturday, she left the house, never to return. Bridget came downstairs from her attic room around 6 o'clock to build a fire in the kitchen and begin cooking breakfast. An hour later, John Morse and Mr. and Mrs. Borden came down to eat, and they lingered in conversation around the table for nearly an hour. Lizzie slept late and did not join them for the meal. At 9:15, Andrew Borden left the house and went downtown. Abby Borden went upstairs to make the bed in the guest room that Morse was staying in. She asked Bridget to wash the windows. At 9:30, she came downstairs for a few moments and then went back up again, commenting that she needed fresh pillowcases. Bridget went about her daily chores and started on the window washing, retrieving pails and water from the barn. She also paused for a few minutes to chat over the fence with the hired girl next door. She finished the outside of the windows at about 10:30 and then started inside. 15 minutes later, Mr. Borden returned home. Bridget let him in and Lizzie came downstairs. She told her father that Mrs. Borden has gone out. She had a note from someone who was sick. Lizzie and Emma always called their stepmother Mrs. Borden, and recently, the relationships between them, especially with Lizzie, was strained. Borden took the key to his bedroom off a shelf and went up the back stairs. The room could only be reached by these stairs, as there was no hallway, and the front stairs only gave access to Lizzie's room, from which Emma's could be reached, and the guest room. There were connecting doors between the elder Borden's rooms and Lizzie's room, but they were usually kept locked. Borden stayed upstairs for only a few minutes before coming back down and settling onto the sofa in the sitting room. Lizzie began to heat up an iron to press some handkerchiefs. "Are you going out this afternoon, Maggie?" she asked Bridget. "There is a cheap sale of dress goods at Sargent's this afternoon, at 8 cents a yard." Bridget replied that she was not. The heat of the morning, combined with the window washing and her touch of stomach ailment, had left her feeling poorly, and she went up the back stairs to her attic room for a nap. This was a few minutes before 11 o'clock. "Maggie, come down," Lizzie shouted from the bottom of the back stairs, and Bridget's eyes fluttered open. She had drifted off into a restless sleep, but the urgency of Lizzie's cries startled her awake. "What is the matter?" Bridget cried. She smoothed out her dress, slipped into her shoes and scurried to the doorway. As her feet tapped down the staircase, she was horrified by what she heard next. "Come down quick," Lizzie wailed. "Father's dead. Somebody's come and killed him." As Bridget hurried from the staircase, she found Lizzie standing at the back door. Her face was pale and taut. She stopped the young maid from going into the sitting room, saying, "Don't go in there. Go and get the doctor. Run." Dr. Bowen, a family friend, lived across the street from the Bordens, and Bridget ran directly to the house. The doctor was out, but Bridget told Mrs. Bowen that Mr. Borden had been killed. She ran directly back to the house. "Where were you when this thing happened?" she asked Lizzie. "I was out in the yard, and I heard a groan and came in. The screen door was wide open," Lizzie replied, and then sent Bridget to summon the Borden sisters' friend, Miss Alice Russell, who lived a few blocks away. By now, the neighbors were starting to gather on the lawn, and someone had called for the police. Mrs. Adelaide Churchill, the next-door neighbor, came over to Lizzie, who was at the back entrance to the house, and asked if anything was wrong. Lizzie responded by saying, "Oh, Mrs. Churchill, someone has killed Father." "Where is your father?" she asked. "In the sitting room." "Where were you when it happened?" "I went to the barn to get a piece of iron." Mrs. Churchill then asked, "Where is your mother?" Lizzie said that she didn't know, and that Abby Borden, her stepmother, had received a note asking her to respond to someone who was sick. She also added, "But I don't know but that she is killed too, for I thought I heard her come in." father must have an enemy, for we have all been sick, and we think the milk has been poisoned." By this time, Dr. Bowen had returned, along with Bridget, who had hurried back from informing Miss Russell of the day's dire events. Dr. Bowen examined the body and asked for a sheet to cover it. Borden had been attacked with a sharp object, probably an axe, and so much damage had been done to his head and face that Bowen, a close friend, could not at first positively identify him. Borden's head was turned slightly to the right and 11 blows had gashed his face. One eye had been cut in half and his nose had been severed. The majority of the blows had been struck within the area that extended from the eyes and nose to the ears. Blood was still seeping from the wounds and had been splashed onto the wall above the sofa, the floor and on a picture hanging on the wall. It looked as though Borden had been attacked from above and behind as he slept. Several minutes passed before anyone thought of going upstairs to see if Abby Borden had come home. "Maggie, I am almost positive I heard her coming in," Lizzie spoke. "Go upstairs and see." Bridget refused to go upstairs by herself, so Mrs. Churchill went with her. They went up the staircase together, but Mrs. Churchill was the first to see Abby lying on the floor of the guest room. She had fallen in a pool of blood, and Mrs. Churchill later said that she only looked like the form of a person. Bridget saw Mrs. Borden's body. Mrs. Churchill rushed by her, viewed the obviously dead body, and rushed downstairs. "Is there another?" a neighbor asked her. "Yes," the woman replied. "She is up there." Dr. Bowen found that Mrs. Borden had been struck more than a dozen times, from the back. The autopsy later revealed that there had been 19 blows to her head, probably from the same hatchet that had killed Mr. Borden. The blood on Mrs. Borden's body was dark and congealed, leading him to believe that she had been killed before her husband. Dr. Bowen was heavily involved in the activities of the Borden house on the day of the murder. He was the first to examine the bodies, sent a telegram to Emma to summon her home, assisted Dr. Dolan with the autopsies and even prescribed a calming tranquilizer for Lizzie. He was a constant presence in the house, and his involvement with them, especially on August 4th, has led to him being considered the major figure in some of the conspiracies developed around the murders. A call reached the Fall River police station at 11:15, but as things would happen, that day marked the annual picnic of the Fall River Police Department, and most of them were off enjoying an outing at Rocky Point. The only officer dispatched to the house was Officer George W. Allen. He ran the 400 yards to the house, saw that Andrew Borden was dead, and ran back to the station house to inform the city marshal of the events. He left no one in charge of the crime scene. While he was gone, neighbors overran the house, comforting Lizzie and peering in at the gruesome state of Andrew Borden's body. The constant traffic trampled and destroyed any clues that might have been left behind. During the 30 minutes or so that no authorities were on the scene, a county medical examiner named Dolan passed by the house by chance. He looked in and was pressed into service by Dr. Bowen. Dolan examined the bodies as well, and after hearing that the family had been sick and that the milk was suspected, he took samples of it. Later that afternoon, he had the bodies photographed and then removed the stomachs and sent them, along with the milk, to the Harvard Medical School for analysis. No poison was ever found. The murder investigation that followed was chaotic. The police were reluctant to suspect Lizzie of the murder, as it was against the perceived social understanding of the era that a woman such as she was could have possibly committed such a heinous crime. Other solutions were advanced but were discarded as even more impossible. A profusion of clues were discovered over the next few days, all of which went nowhere. A boy reported seeing a man jump over the back fence of the Borden property, and while a man was found matching the boy's description, he had an unbreakable alibi. A bloody hatchet was found on the Sylvia farm in South Somerset, but it proved to be covered in chicken blood. While Bridget was also seen as a suspect for a short time, the investigation finally began to center on Lizzie. A circumstantial case began to be developed against her with no incriminating physical evidence, like bloody clothes, a real motive for the killings, or even a convincing demonstration of how and when she committed the murders. Over the course of several weeks though, investigators managed to compile a sequence of events that certainly cast suspicion on the spinster Sunday school teacher. The timeline ran from August 3rd, the day before the murders, to August 7th, the day that Alice Russell saw her friend burning a dress that may, or may not, have had blood on it. August 3rd. There were several incidents that police believed related to the murders that occurred on Wednesday. The first was in the early morning hours when Abby Borden went across the street to Dr. Bowen and told him that she and her husband had been violently ill throughout the night. He told her that he didn't think the vomiting was serious and he sent her home. Later, he dropped in to check on Andrew, who told him rather ungratefully that he was not ill and would not pay for an unsolicited house call. There would be no evidence of poisoning found in the Borden autopsies. Another incident took place when Lizzie tried to buy 10 cents worth of prussic acid from Eli Benz, a clerk at Smith's drugstore. She explained to him that she wanted the poison to kill moths in a sealskin cape, but he refused to sell it to her without a prescription. A customer and another clerk also identified Lizzie as being in the store that morning, but she denied it. She testified at the inquest that she had not attempted to purchase the poison and had not been at Smith's that day. The third incident was the arrival of John Morse in the early afternoon. He came without luggage but intended to stay the night. Both he and Lizzie testified that they did not see each other until after the murders the next day, although Lizzie knew that he was there. Finally, that evening Lizzie visited her friend, Miss Alice Russell. According to Miss Russell, Lizzie was agitated, worried over some threat to her father, and concerned that something was about to happen. "I feel as if something were hanging over me and I cannot throw it off," she told her. She added that her father had enemies and that she was frightened that something was going to happen to the family. An eerie foreshadowing of the future? Or laying the groundwork for an alibi? August 4th. On the day of the murders, there were several parts of the story that did not make sense to the investigators, or could not have happened the way that Liz expressed them. Abby was killed, according to the autopsy, at around 9:30 in the morning. The killer, if it was anyone but Lizzie or Bridget, would have had to have concealed himself, or herself, in the house for well over an hour, waiting for Andrew Borden's return. Abby could have been discovered at any moment. Abby's time of death also posed another problem for investigators. According to Lizzie, she had gone out but she obviously hadn't. The note that Lizzie said that Abby had received, asking her to visit the sick friend, was never found. Lizzie later said that she might have inadvertently burned it. When Andrew Borden returned to the house, Bridget had to let him in as the screen door was fastened on the inside with 3 locks. This would have made it extremely difficult for the killer to get inside. Only a small window of opportunity would have existed while Bridget was fetching a pail and water from the barn. In addition, Bridget later testified that while she was unlocking the door for Mr. Borden, she had Lizzie laugh from upstairs. However, Lizzie swore that she had been in the kitchen when her father came home. Borden also had to retrieve the key to his bedroom from the shelf in the kitchen to get into his room. This was done as a precaution because of a burglary the year before. In June 1891, a police captain inspected the house after Andrew Borden reported that it had been broken into. He found that Borden's desk had been rummaged through and over $100, along with Andrew's watch and chain, several small items and some streetcar tickets, had been taken. There was no clue as to how anyone could have gotten into the house, although Lizzie offered the fact that the cellar door had been open. The neighborhood was canvassed but no one reported seeing a stranger in the vicinity. According to the police captain, Borden said several times to him, "I'm afraid the police will not be able to find the real thief." It is unknown what he may have meant by this, but various conspiracy theorists have their own ideas. On the afternoon of the murder, an officer asked Lizzie if there were any hatchets in the house and she told Bridget to show him where they could be found. 4 of them were discovered in the basement, including one with dried blood and hair on it, later determined to be from a cow. Another of the hatchets was rusted and the others were covered with dust. One of these was without a handle and was covered in ashes. The broken handle appeared to be recent, so it was taken into evidence. A Sergeant Harrington and another officer asked Lizzie where she had been that morning, and she said that she had been in the barn loft looking for iron for fishing sinkers. The two men examined the barn and found the loft floor to be thick with dust, with no evidence that anyone had been up there. Deputy Marshal John Fleet questioned Lizzie and asked her who might have committed the murders. Other than an unknown man with whom her father had gotten into an argument with a few weeks before, she could think of no one. When asked directly if Uncle John Morse or Bridget could have killed her father and mother, she said that they couldn't have. Morse had left the house before 9 o'clock, and Bridget had been sleeping when Andrew had been killed. Then she pointedly reminded Fleet that Abby was not her mother, but her stepmother. August 5th. On the following day, the investigation continued. By now, the story had appeared in the newspapers and the entire town was in an uproar. Sergeant Harrington found Eli Bentz at Smith's drugstore and interviewed him about the attempt to buy poison. Emma engaged Mr. Andrew Jennings as he and Lizzie's attorney. The police continued to investigate, but nothing of significance was found. August 6th. Saturday was the day of the funerals for Andrew and Abby Borden. The service was conducted by the Reverends Buck and Judd, from the two congregational churches. The burial, however, did not take place. At the gravesite, the police informed the ministers that another autopsy needed to be conducted. This time, the heads of the Bordens were removed from the body, the skin removed and plaster casts were made of the skulls. For some reason, Mr. Borden's head was not returned to his coffin. August 7th. On Sunday morning, Alice Russell observed Lizzie burning a dress in the kitchen stove. She told her friend that, "If I were you, I wouldn't let anybody see me do that, Lizzie." Lizzie said it was a dress stained with paint, and was of no use. It was this testimony at the inquest that prompted Judge Blaisdell of the 2nd District Court to charge Lizzie with the murders. The inquest itself was kept secret, but at its conclusion, Lizzie was charged with the murder of her father and was taken into custody. The only testimony that Lizzie ever gave during all of the legal proceedings was at the inquest, and we will never know for sure what she said. She was arraigned the following day and replied that she was not guilty of the charge. She was then taken to the Taunton Gaol, which had facilities for female prisoners. After that, a preliminary hearing was held, again before Judge Blaisdell. Lizzie did not testify, but the record of her testimony at the inquest was entered into evidence by her attorney, Andrew Jennings. The judge declared her probable guilt and bound Lizzie over for the grand jury, who heard the case during the last week of its session. The Commonwealth, represented by Prosecutor Hosea Knowlton, had the disagreeable task of building the case against Lizzie. When he finished his presentation to the grand jury, he surprisingly invited defense attorney Jennings to present a case for the defense. This was something that was simply not done in Massachusetts. In effect, a trial was being conducted before the grand jury. Many saw this as a chance that the charge against Lizzie might be dismissed. Then, on December 1st, Alice Russell again testified about the burning of the dress. The next day, Lizzie was charged with 3 counts of murder. Strangely, she had been charged with the murder of her father, her stepmother, and then the murders of both of them. The trial was scheduled to begin on June 5, 1893. The trial itself lasted 14 days and news of it filled the front pages of every major newspaper in the country. Between 30 and 40 reporters from the Boston and New York papers and the wire services were in the courtroom every day. The trial began on June 5, and after a day to select the jury, which consisted of 12 middle-aged farmers and tradesmen, the prosecution spent the next 7 days putting on its case. Hosea Knowlton was the reluctant prosecutor in the case. He had been forced into the role by Arthur Pillsbury, Attorney General of Massachusetts, who should have been the principal attorney for the prosecution. However, as Lizzie's trial date approached, Pillsbury felt the pressure building from Lizzie's supporters, particularly women's groups and religious organizations. Worried about the next election, he directed Knowlton, who was the district attorney in Fall River, to lead the prosecution in his place. He also assigned William Moody, District Attorney of Essex County, to assist him. Moody made the opening statements for the prosecution. He presented three arguments. First, that Lizzie was predisposed to murder her father and stepmother because of their animosity toward one another. Second, that she planned the murder and carried it out, and third, that her behavior, and her contradictory testimony, after the fact, was not that of an innocent person. Moody did an excellent job, and many have regarded him as the most competent attorney involved in the case. At one point, he threw a dress onto the prosecution table that he planned to admit as evidence. As he did so, the tissue paper that was covering the skull of Andrew Borden lifted and then flooded away. Dramatically, Lizzie slid to the floor in a dead faint. Crucial to the prosecution in the case was evidence that supplied a motive for Lizzie to commit the murders. This was done by using a number of witnesses who testified to Lizzie's dislike of her stepmother and her complaints about her father's spendthrift ways. The prosecution also tried to establish that Borden was writing a new will that would leave Emma and Lizzie with the pittance and Abby with a huge portion of his $500,000 estate. One of the witnesses called to establish this was John Morse, who first said that Andrew discussed the new will with him and then later said that he never told him anything about it. The prosecution then turned to Lizzie's predisposition towards murder and her strange behavior before and after the events. They again called Alice Russell to testify about the burning of the dress. The destruction of it seemed a possible answer as to why Lizzie was not covered with blood after killing her parents. It was highly probable that she would have been spattered with it if she did commit the murders. In later years, some have theorized that perhaps she wore a smock over her dress during the murders, or that perhaps she was naked when she did it. However, the smock would have been bloody too and would have had to be disposed of. As far as Lizzie being naked, this seems doubtful as well. Ignore the fact that in the Victorian society of Fall River, a young woman would have never appeared nude in front of her father, even to kill him, and focus on the fact that Lizzie never had time to bathe after killing Abby or in the few minutes between the killing of Andrew and her calling for Bridget. To the prosecution though, the burning of the dress suggested that Lizzie had changed clothing after the murders. But why would she have kept the dress for 3 days before burning it, and what would she have worn for the hours between the two deaths? Someone would have surely noticed a dress covered with blood. On Saturday, June 10, the prosecution attempted to enter Lizzie's testimony from the inquest into the record. The defense objected, since it was testimony from one who had not been formally charged. The jury was withdrawn so that the lawyers could argue it out, and on Monday, when court resumed, the three-judge panel excluded Lizzie's contradictory inquest testimony. On Wednesday, June 14, the prosecution called Eli Bentz, the drugstore clerk, to the stand. The defense objected to his testimony as irrelevant and prejudicial. The judges sustained the objection, and Lizzie's attempt to buy poison was thrown out of the record. The prosecution called several medical witnesses, including Dr. Dolan. One of them even produced the skull of Andrew Borden to show how the blows had been struck. Unfortunately for the prosecution, these witnesses had an adverse effect on the case, as the defense used their testimonies to strike points in Lizzie's favor. They were forced to state that whoever had committed the murders would have been covered with blood. There was no one to say that Lizzie had been. Lizzie Borden's defense counsel used only 2 days to present its case. The two attorneys consisted of Andrew Jennings and George Robinson. Jennings was one of Fall River's most prominent citizens and had been Andrew Borden's private attorney. He was a solemn man who never again spoke about the Borden case after its conclusion. He and his younger associate, Melvin Adams, were instrumental in getting Lizzie's damaging testimony excluded from the case. Jennings was joined by George Robinson, who, even with less legal experience, was very beneficial to the case. For the most part, the defense offered witnesses who could either corroborate Lizzie's story, or who could provide alternate possibilities as to who the killer might be. The testimony of the various witnesses was meant to do little but provide reasonable doubt about Lizzie's guilt. For instance, an ice cream peddler testified to seeing a woman, presumably Lizzie, coming out the barn. This bolstered her story that she had actually been there. A passerby claimed to see a wild-eyed man around the time of the murders. Mr. Joseph Lemay claimed that he was walking in the deep woods, some miles from the city, about 12 days after the murders when he heard someone crying, "Poor Mrs. Borden! Poor Mrs. Borden! Poor Mrs. Borden!" He looked over a conveniently placed wall and saw a man sitting on the ground. The man, who had bloodstains on his shirt, picked up a hatchet, shook it at him and then disappeared into the woods. Needless to say, Lemay's story has never been given much credibility. The defense also called witnesses who claimed to see a mysterious young man in the vicinity of the Borden house who was never properly explained. They also called Emma Borden to dispute the suggestion that Lizzie had any motive to want to kill their parents. Emma remained very supportive of her sister during the trial, although there is one witness, a prison matron, who testified that Lizzie and Emma had an argument when she was visiting her sister in Gaol. On Monday, June 19, Robinson delivered his closing arguments and Knowlton began his closing arguments for the prosecution. He completed them on the following day. The judges then asked Lizzie if she had anything to say for herself, and she spoke for the only time during the trial. "I am innocent," she said. "I leave it to my counsel to speak for me." Instructions were then given to the jury and they left to deliberate over the verdict. A little over an hour later, the jury returned with its verdict. Lizzie Borden was found not guilty on all 3 charges. Public opinion was, by this time, of the feeling that the police and the courts had persecuted Lizzie long enough. 5 weeks after the trial, Lizzie, who henceforth called herself Lisbeth, and Emma purchased and moved into a 13-room, stone house at 306 French Street in Fall River. It was located on the hill, the most fashionable area of the city. Lizzie named the house Maplecroft and had the name carved into the top step leading up to the front door. In 1897, Lizzie was charged with the theft of 2 paintings, valued at less than $100, from the Tilden Thurber store in Fall River. There were no charges ever filed and it is believed the affair was settled privately. In 1904, Lizzie met a young actress, Nance O'Neill, and for the next 2 years, Lizzie and Nance were inseparable. About this time, Emma separated from her sister and moved to Fairhaven. She and Lizzie stopped speaking to one another. Rumors said that sensational revelations about the murders would follow the split, but the revelations never came. Emma stayed with a family of Reverend Buck, and, sometime around 1915, she moved to Newmarket, New Hampshire. Lizzie died on June 1, 1927, at age 67, after a long illness from complications following gallbladder surgery. Emma died 9 days later, as a result of a fall down the back stairs of her house in Newmarket. They were buried together in the family plot, along with a sister who had died in early childhood, their mother, their stepmother, and their headless father. Both Lizzie and Emma left their estates to charitable causes and Lizzie designated $500 for the perpetual care of her father's grave. Bridget Sullivan never worked for any of the Bordens again. After the terrible events of the murder and the trial, she left town. She lived in modest circumstances in Butte, Montana until her death in 1948. Those who suggested that she had been paid off to keep quiet about the murders could find no evidence of this in what she left behind. Over 100 years have passed since the murders in Fall River and we still cannot be sure of what we think we know about them. Perhaps because the case remained unsolved, we still have a fascination for the events surrounding the murders. No single theory has ever been regarded as the correct one and every writer on the case seems to have a favorite culprit. But how can we explain what draws us to the story? Is it because of the murders themselves, or is Lizzie herself to blame? Who can look at a photo of her, always smiling slightly, and wonder what secrets she carried with her to the grave? We will never know, but that hasn't stopped anyone from trying to guess. The books and articles that have followed the events have each put their own special spin on the story. They use the same evidence and testimony to argue different suspicions of who really killed Andrew and Abby Borden. During the early days of the investigation, and well into the days of the trial, a number of accusations were made. At times the killer was said to be John Morse, Bridget Sullivan, Emma Borden, Dr. Bowen, and even one of Lizzie's Sunday school students. Since that time, there have been other suggested killers. Some of the theories are credible and some are not. One of the theories remains that Lizzie Borden actually committed the murders of her parents and managed to get away with it. This theory was especially popular in books written prior to 1940, and it still turns up occasionally today. Most of the writers who stand by this solution see the court rulings and poorly executed prosecution case as the reason that Lizzie was never found guilty. They simply refuse to see how an outsider could have committed the crimes. The main problem with this idea is that it would have taken careful planning for Lizzie to kill Abby Borden and then wait patiently for the time to come to kill Andrew and still interact with Bridget Sullivan. This seems inconsistent with the bullet-style attacks on the Bordens. The killer was obviously in a frenzy when each murder was committed, and during the cooling down time between them, it seems unlikely that they would have been able to so easily iron handkerchiefs, attend to household duties, and carry on conversations with the maid. There is also the glaring problem of the blood. If Lizzie did kill her stepmother, where was the blood that would have been on her dress when she called Bridget a short time later? If she did change clothing twice in the same morning, wouldn't Bridget have noticed this? It has been suggested that Lizzie may have gone to the barn between the murders as she claimed to and washed the blood off. There was running water there, but if she did, how did she wash off the blood after her father's murder? Some writers believe that Lizzie and Bridget planned the murders together and that Bridget, when she went to Alice Russell's house, spirited away the bloody hatchet and dress so that they were never found. This theory is also used to explain the testimony that each woman gave about the day of the murder, never implicating the other. It seems hard to believe that Abby Borden's fall to the upstairs floor would not have been heard from below, especially since Abby weighed in at close to 200 pounds. However, there is no proof of this either, and it still places one or both of the women in the role of a depraved killer. While it seems hard to believe that Lizzie did commit the murders, it doesn't mean that she was not guilty in other ways. In other words, while she may not have actually handled the hatchet, she may have known who did. One person who has been accused in this capacity was Emma Borden. It has been noted with some suspicion how she may have arranged an alibi for herself, claiming to be some 15 miles away in Fairhaven, but actually returned to Fall River, hid upstairs in the Borden house, committed the murders, and then returned to Fairhaven, where she received a telegram from Dr. Bowen. Once Lizzie is accused, the two sisters work together to protect each other. Later, the woman had a falling out over their father's estate and Lizzie's alleged affair with Nance O'Neill. However, neither one of them ever spoke of the murder again. Another astonishing theory pins the murders on William Borden, the slightly retarded, illegitimate son of Andrew Borden, who coincidentally, or not, committed suicide a few years after the trial. According to this theory, Lizzie, John Morse, Dr. Bowen, and Andrew Jennings all conspired to keep his involvement a secret because of his illegitimate status and a claim that he might make against the estate if his relationship with the Bordens was found out. Allegedly, William was making demands of his father, who was in the process of writing a new will. Borden rejected the boy and William became enraged. He first killed Mrs. Borden and then, after hiding in the house with Lizzie's knowledge, killed his father as well. The conspirators then either paid William off or threatened him, or both, and decided that Lizzie would allow herself to be suspected and tried for the murders, knowing that she could always identify the real killer, should that be necessary. This may be much in the way of speculation, but it's long been a favorite theory by many. So who did kill Andrew and Abby Borden? It's unlikely that we will ever know. It's also unlikely that we will ever discover just what Lizzie and her defense counsel really knew about the events in 1892. The papers from Lizzie's defense are still locked up and have never been released. The files remain sealed away in the offices of the Springfield, Massachusetts law firm that descended from the firm that defended Lizzie during the trial. There are no plans to ever release them. But the question of who killed Mr. and Mrs. Borden is not the only mysterious riddle that lingers in the wake of this heinous event. Another question might be, who haunts the house at 92 2nd Street where the Bordens once lived? In the years since the murders and the trial, the house has gone on to become the Lizzie Borden Bed and Breakfast Museum, a time capsule of the era when the murders took place in a quaint inn. Guests come from all over the country to be able to sleep in the room where Abby Borden was killed, but not all of them sleep peacefully, and not all of the spirits here rest in peace.